thank you everyone for coming to our studio and factory this evening for the 10th Mud Talk, Design Without Compromise. Is that right? Design Without Compromise? Sounds good. I'm James Curtin, and in my role as Executive Director of Mud Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the Cooks River catchment where this studio is located, and pay our respects to ancestors and elders past and present. We also acknowledge the contribution Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of this nation caring for our country for over 60,000 years, and honour their unique culture and spiritual relationship to this, and that the sovereignty was never ceded. Also a few thank yous. Firstly, a special thank you to the team at Brickworks and Selena O'Hare from Whisper for bringing a lot of people here tonight this evening. Secondly, thank you to Siho Su for lending us the beautiful maroony furniture, which our stylish panel is seated on. And finally, thank you respectively to Esther for the deliciously distinctive gin, and Cappy for the responsible beverages. More than a moderator and thought starter tonight is Anne-Maree Sargeant from the Authentic Design Alliance. Anne-Maree, who will moderate this evening's talk, with 30 years as a design protagonist, Anne-Maree is a journalist, furniture specialist and advocate, uniquely blending legal expertise with industry knowledge. She defends original design while combating furniture piracy as the director of Authentic Design Alliance. Thanks, and over to you, Anne-Maree. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Okay, it's really interesting. We've given probably 3 or 4 of these talks related to sustainability over the last 4 weeks. Most recently at Melbourne Design Week, we gave a couple of them. And it's interesting to see that sustainability is at the forefront of everyone's practice. And everyone's tackling it in a different way. So it's very poignant that today, on World Environment Day, which is a day that was founded by the United Nations in 1972, and it has the aim of creating a better planet in many different ways. And tonight what we're going to do is look at it from a material perspective, consider how waste or byproducts of our practice can become something else and something new, and then look at the way, or even start to think about the way all of us can do things differently, and hopefully spark some thoughts that can start conversations. Now, the main thing is nobody knows everything about sustainability. Everyone's learning on the go, and everyone's coming to it from a different perspective. So it's really important to have conversations, whether it's with your team or with your colleagues, or just with your friends and family, or not just, and with your friends and family, because with the knowledge and the shared knowledge, we all can learn more. So that's the most important perspective. Speaking of perspectives, we're going to have 4 different ones. So our panel, we have got Eve Castle from Brickworks, who's going to come from a building industry, or give us the lens through the building industry. Shelley, who needs little introduction, the founder and creative director of Mud, can come from a handmade, locally produced product that is using natural materials. Mark Simpson, co-director and co-founder of DesignOffice, will speak from the experiences of an interior designer and someone who's a spatial designer. And Claire Kennedy from 5 Mile Radius. Claire's practice uniquely blends architecture and fabrication. So it's a lot to unpack. We'll take questions at the end, and I think what we'll do is we might start, first of all, with you, Shelley. Shelley loves the microphone.
I do.
Shelley, give us, I know everyone's, or most people here have enjoyed the tour of the factory and the space downstairs. Give us a brief overview on Mud 30 years ago as a little idea, and where Mud now is as an international brand. Can you span that gap in a couple of
sentences?
Couple of paragraphs.
It's a little tricky. But yeah, so 30 years ago I was making awful presents kind friends who said, this is lovely, and encouraged me from a Potes Lane garage that I rented off a poor unsuspecting man who ended up getting clay all through it, to gradually, always growing, always looking for something, a way of making my passion a business. I always wanted it to be a business, and I wanted it to be the best business it could be. So, you know, a lot of people have helped along the way in getting us there. But, you know, it started at wholesale, which is a really bad idea. If you want to manufacture and sell at wholesale, that's your only outlet. That's not going to make you very much money, and it's not very sustainable in Australia. Hence, there's not a lot of manufacturing that stays here. Then we opened our first retail store, and all of a sudden we had great cash flow, and it changed our business completely. That was, I'm trying to think how long ago that was, 2020? 2007 was our first retail store in Wallara, or in the shadow of the mothership at Bondi Junction. And yeah, so, you know, that changed everything for us. It changed our cash flow, it changed our connection with community and connection with the end user. And we started to get amazing feedback. We could, you know, from that we could amend and change our product, and we got a little bit more on point every time. And so through time, over time, the range has evolved. And now we're always looking for something new to do.
So talk to the point about locally made, and you're saying that it's tremendously difficult for brands and businesses to stay onshore in Australia. What are the two or three key challenges there that drive people offshore, and how have you navigated that?
I just don't think there's there's definitely no incentive to design manufacture in Australia. There's no incentive or support from the government. So that is one of the problems. I mean, we've got, you know, people get paid properly in this country, which is fantastic, and we want to support that. We absolutely make sure that our teams are paid as much as we can afford to pay them.
Surely cost would be a fact of, you know, the end product, price of the end product, and the rent and the wages.
Price of the end product, there is a point where, you know, a dinner plate price can only be a certain amount. You need to buy 12 of them for your house. You can't make it too expensive. But also, you know, it just depends. I think Australians do see quality. They, you know, I think it's taken us a long time to sort of get ourselves into a position where people understand what it is that we make. Everybody here, I'm sure, didn't realise how handmade a process we have here. And people who have been through the studio before will probably understand it. And, you know, 10 sets of hands touch every single piece of mud, and in a meaningful way. They're not just doing a small part of the process. They all have input all the way through to putting it into packaging and sending it out and making sure it arrives intact. I mean, we are a long way away from the rest of the world, where the rest of our markets. So actually, that is a huge challenge for us. But through time, we've been able to navigate that as well.
And in terms of reuse, like one of the core tenets of being able to reuse a product is purity and quality of ingredients in the first place. And if you take the data science theory, which is if you put junk in, you get junk out. And in order to be able to reuse or recycle or repair anything, you can only do that with quality ingredients. What's the starting point there, and what sort of byproducts do you create? You know, what are the offcuts?
Well, again, we talked about it downstairs as we were walking through, but all the trimmings that we have in our process. So we start with a good quality product, Limoges porcelain. It's got a great reputation. I spoke about the fact that it has this sort of ability to be able to stretch in our process, which gives us a little bit more, it's a little bit more flexible than other clays. And I also spoke about we'll probably be in trouble if we can't buy this particular clay, because we've looked around the world and we've not found another one that's as good. Then the byproducts of that is sort of the offcuts. So everything that we do up to a certain point we can recycle, and we do. So everything, any of the trimmings on the tables go straight back into we turn it back into clay. If somebody breaks something in the trimming process, it can happen as well. Once it gets glaze on it, that's where we have to stop. And we have a small amount of pieces that do go into landfill, but a very small amount of pieces.
And I guess we'll dive a little bit deeper into the exact nature of the collaborations, but you've done collaborations with, well, all of the panel here in different ways, but within product with 5 Mile Radius and also with Brickworks.
Yeah.
What were your steps before that where you realised you had all of this byproduct? And how did you start to think about what it might eventually become?
I think COVID was fantastic for us to just have time to think about things, and that's when really our sort of environmental journey began as a company. We had a moment, I mean, we always sort of cared. We'd put solar panels on the roof and, you know, in our last studio. But when we moved into this space, we kind of had more time to actually imagine what was going to happen. I think we were also waiting for some government advice. There was a lot of conversation around what the government were going to do around that time, and nothing was sort of eventuating, and I just said, we've just got to do it ourselves. We can't wait. And any little step that you can take in a direction makes a difference, and it isn't that hard. If you just have at the beginning of the conversation, you say, well, how does this fit with our sustainability? At the beginning of the conversation, does it work? And you've got a team around you that are really supporting that, then it's a much easier process.
That's really interesting. When we were part of a talk at Living Edge during Melbourne Design Week, and it was on the Australia Post building of how they reused 4,500 pieces of furniture that were from a fit-out 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And if that product wasn't quality and wasn't built to be refurbished, then that wouldn't have been enabled, which goes back to the data science theory of junk in, junk out. But if you invert that,
when we do our retail stores, you know, we buy Vitsu because we know that we can move it, we can reimagine that we can repair it. James and I both did training at Vitsu. We know how to flip the panels and rebuild a set of drawers. So, you know, and we'll happily do that rather than throwing out half a system.
I'll bear that in mind when I get my dream shelving. We might move along to you, Claire. You're an architect and you also have a fabrication business which is all integrated. Can you explain how that fits together? Because you've got that in quite a circular process, but it's an unusual marriage.
Yeah, someone described it yesterday as a hot mess, actually, when they were trying to brand us. And it sort of is. I mean, I will latch on to Shelley's point about when you make something by hand and you see all the steps, you start to understand that it's got a value beyond just, oh, that's a mug. It sort of holds a meaning, and there's sort of an embodied kind of message. And I think that as a sort of emerging architect was the start for our practice, was that if buildings are an assemblage of materials that you care about and you know where they come from, the building takes on a character and a quality, and you care about it and you care about its end of life. And so 5 Mile Radius, I'm an architect by background, and was really an effort to kind of, I guess, understand and take control of the building materials that we use, and do that in a way that we could sort of practice what we preach, and use making as a vehicle for exploring materials and prototyping and testing, and also then therefore doing bits of projects that sometimes, you know, can fall away during the pricing stage because they're too risky or too hard or they haven't been done before. So we use design thinking to kind of explore ideas, and then the making to kind of test and prototype. And the two sort of go back and forth. We're not builders, we're carpenters. So the team is, you know, half designers and half makers, quite intentionally, and we sort of operate out of a factory like this in Brisbane, not as lush as this factory, but and we sort of sit with and work back and forth, I guess. And
you've managed to branch into products as a consequence or unintended consequence of that. And I think your practice first came across my Instagram screen probably during one of the lockdowns, and I saw the telegraph stool, and I couldn't believe A, how clever it was, B, the thinking behind it, and also the fact that it's a really affordable product. Do you want to talk through that, because it is a really simple but excellent example of how
philosophy.
Yeah.
So the philosophy of the studio was really always around local materials as a starting point, but then at some point we're practicing, particularly in Brisbane, there's a lot of construction waste and industry waste, and the circular economy also, the practice is sort of 5 years old now, or 6 years old, and that was, the reuse was becoming more important than just biomaterials, which is kind of where we started. And so at some point as a studio that's sort of prototyping and making, we decided that we needed to maybe do something that brought in an amount of money as well and do it consistently. And so our best design ideas form a product range that we sell to architects a lot, and the design community, but also just as a retail shop. And one of the, I guess our most successful product is a thing called a telegraph stool, which really is just a telegraph pole. Well, we get in a lot of trouble for saying that on Instagram, actually, like by people. It's a power pole. But there is a recycled timber supplier, Kennedy's Timbers, and they have 400,000 telegraph poles.
So they're decommissioned.
Decommissioned, they get a thing called ground line failure. So essentially they're waterlogged at the bottom. And so then they're no longer safe. But then there's some of them are treated. So the treated ones are pretty hard to find a use for. You can use them, still cut them up and use them structurally as treated timber. We use untreated ones, and they are segmented, and then you've got a log, and we chainsaw those to cut 3 legs, and you pull it apart and you get 2 stools out of one log. And then we burn the outside of it, which is the only process there that really adds some embodied energy, but it's by far offset from the timber that we've saved. And that's a cool product because the charring preserves the surface of the timber, I should say, and also all the poles look random, so no one wants them, and that allows them to look uniform and kind of makes them sort of feel new again. But the cool thing about it is there's zero waste because of the way we chainsaw it, the poles come apart, and so you've got something which can be recycled, and it is zero waste to make, and it can go indoors and outdoors. It's really versatile. It's a stool, it's a side table. So there's a lot of our kind of principles there about simplicity and kind of efficiency that product sort of exemplifies.
And for $300 and something,
well, no, not anymore actually, but no, they are still about that.
And then moving on to your next product discovery, let's step back to step forward. Let's talk about how you ended up collecting wet concrete off building sites and turning that into... Yeah,
that's another... I don't know how we started that, but it was just it was an art project for the Brisbane City Council exhibition piece, and we know a lot of carpenters, and they talk about the overpour, which is the stuff it happens on commercial big scale sites and residential sites, but in different ways. But the residential site, you might order 2 cubic meters and only need 1.5, so you've got 0.5 left. And because it's a small site, there's only one skip. There's not a lot of segregation. It goes in the general skip, and so then that is the concrete company can take it back, but there's a large fee to do that. So everyone kind of takes it, and then there's no use for it, and so it's immediately kind of set, and it might get separated at the resource recovery centre, then it will be crushed and turned to road base, so immediately sort of downcycled, or it is just sent to mixed use landfill. So there's a huge opportunity to use this concrete, but you have to use it when it's wet. And this is also happening with big concrete trucks all day, every day. That's 7 cubes at a time, and it's just... So
what happens? You're all in a meeting in the studio, and then everyone's going, concreting coming, or have you got a process?
we work on call when it comes to concreting, which is probably mad, but we have formwork set up. We make tabletops, we make trivets for mud. I was going to say, Shelley, how would you describe a trivet? Like, what is, when we say we make trivets, people go...
It's an object that you put hot dishes and hot objects on
that
preserves your bench top or table.
I think people are using them for all kinds of things. Yeah, it is so we make these beautiful objects for mud out of the same process.
But just stepping back, go to the bench tops that you started making, because then it gets to a point where Claire says, and then Shelley came knocking. But before Shelley came knocking, can you speak to us about the bench tops and tabletops?
Yeah, I mean, they're probably our most... I mean, so this overpour concrete comes to us wet, and we pour it into essentially a 40 mil thick reinforced concrete slab. We add other bits of waste to that, broken tiles, broken brick, ceramics, glass, stone. And
so it becomes like a terrazzo.
Yeah, we call it waste terrazzo. But it's an all waste product because the concrete would have been waste and then the stuff added. And terrazzo is always a mongrel mix of kind of things traditionally. And so we're kind of just continuing that lineage. And we make all kinds of things out of that, public art, lots of stuff.
So before we go to the trivets, Shelley, how did you find 5 Mile Radius and what was your thought process?
Now, I can't remember whether I stayed there or Tess stayed there. I think Tess found or read something about the hotel in Byron Bay.
The Sunseeker.
The Sunseeker. And then it was just like, this is a natural fit for our byproduct, which is the pieces that come through that can't be sold at a second sale that are broken. And they have to go into landfill because they're actually broken and a little bit dangerous when... I don't know if anybody's experienced a cut from porcelain, but it takes quite a while to heal. So you don't want to be hanging around with sort of slightly broken pieces of porcelain in your home if you've got kids, whatever. People used to buy them at the second sale and plant cactuses in them and put them in their garden and stuff, but we really needed a proper place for this stuff to go. And that was the first time we said, how about you use some of this? Let's make a terrazzo trivet.
So how is that made? Is that made the same way the bench tops are made, or is it a different process?
We take crates of your crushed product, well, it's broken, and we crush it further. And then, we've created a bunch of reusable moulds that we sort of designed. Shelley designed, or designed the sort of shape and the feel and the colour palette. And then we really do that manufacturing. And, we don't do much wholesale. This is the only wholesale gig that we kind of have. But it's sort of, we're really aligned, I think, in a lot of ways. And for us, there's a great benefit. And, we love being part of this community. So that's, we just do a batch every 2 or 3 months as we go.
Great, thanks Claire. Let's switch gears a bit. Mark, you come from an interior design and architecture background, but predominantly interior design. And a lot of your design starts from the outset about designing from longevity. Do you want to talk through some of the projects that have endured and what are the elements you think that have made them endure?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anne-Maree. As I say, the majority of the studio's work is interiors or working with the existing fabric. And I think there's probably 2 fundamental principles underlie both of those things, is designing, as you say, for longevity, but also designing for change. And I think the way that those 2 things interact and sit together depends obviously on the brief, on the site, and what you're doing with it. So on the one hand, I think, but both of them, I think, are actually underpinned by, I'm a total lover of a diagram, of like, actually, what's it for? What's the brief? What are we doing? What's actually going to fundamentally be the way that this space works? So kind of coming at interior design and architecture from the basis of the existing fabric and the brief and what the space needs to do, as opposed to the kind of dynamics of, I use the word cautiously, but actually trying not to be fashionable, actually. And I think there's something kind of underrated about enduring, and I'm quite proud of the fact that a lot of our work and projects are still fundamentally as they were designed, even if they've changed over that time in terms of the owners or the way they're being used, that it endures. So I suppose one example is with High Ground in Melbourne. There's a former powerhouse which was turned into a cafe, bar, restaurant that we designed probably 9 years ago now. And actually, I mean, probably 2 parts to it. One is actually looking at the building and going, this is amazing. How do we let it be amazing? And actually just insert elements that make it work.
When you say this is amazing, you mean the building envelope and what you started out with?
Yeah, so walking into a space and actually working with it, not against it. And I think that's probably one of the other principles it does have a sustainability lens on it, is actually editing and going, do we need to add anything to this? Do we need to cover all this material up? Do we need to line it? And actually, but then what you put in, making sure that actually it works and functions as a diagram and isn't aesthetically something that becomes inherently dateable and fashionable. And I mean, High Ground's a good example, and obviously that's about the operator and the way that it's run, but it's still insanely busy 9 years ago and hasn't changed its interior. And part of that is, particularly the first owner, and they've sold it since, but he was also just really good at maintaining. He just, really cleaned and repainted and made sure that it always felt fresh as opposed to being replaced unnecessarily at some point.
So as a philosophy, that's not going with trends, being anti-fashion, isn't it?
Yeah, probably to some extent.
It's coming up with solutions that are working with the volume of the existing building and what you've got.
And designing, I think, to what the brief is and what the brand is and what the needs are. Part of our work we've worked with Shelley and the team at Mud for over 15 years now, and across many stores, to Australia but also overseas, the design language, not just talking to Vitsu, hasn't fundamentally changed. It's evolved as the collection has changed, but actually designing well in a way that actually the Fitzroy store still, 15 years later, feels like a new one as well, and actually those
Except that awful concrete floor.
Slightly brown concrete floors, an existing condition to work with. But then also designing new elements that go into that, to come back to designing for change. And I think, it's great that Shelley and the team at Mud are really supportive of this, because the inherent nature of retail, which I do struggle with sometimes, because there's this, the shopping centre side of retail is quite in and out sometimes, but actually designing in a way that at the end of a lease, or when things do change, and of course they do with, precincts and retail, what can we take and remove and reuse? So we've done that with several pieces of componentry, of actually making joinery well with local manufacturers in a way that can be disassembled and reassembled and adapted to a different site. So it's funny, we're working on a relocation of a store with Shelley and the team now, and actually there's going to be hardly anything new in it, actually.
One new table.
One new table. So that as a principle is kind of making sure that it's designed well, that you can do that with it, that it doesn't become this, particularly in a retail lens. And we work in that sector where it's like, oh, that's the old design. Put it in a skip, start again, and trying to not do that as much as you can.
But you're working with a client that obviously you've got shared vision and shared sustainability ethics. And I'm not suggesting the next client I'm about to reference doesn't have those ethics, but you did experience with a retail client with Aquila where you were trying to reuse various elements, but you hit a brick wall. No pun intended.
Not with them, to be honest. And I think that's kind of what I talk to. And this is, without naming any shopping centre names, but and it's changing. I think it's changing a bit too slowly. But shopping centres have inherently had this thing of every 5 or 7 years, you have to put it all in a bin and start again. And so the Aquila store recently the client was really happy with the glass. We were happy with the glass. We were going to reskin the door, reskin the ceiling. They wanted it all new. And it took so much time and energy to get them to eventually agree to not putting it all in the bin.
Who are they you're talking about?
The shopping centre. And it's just this sense of renewal, unfortunately. And I think it's changing. We're definitely coming up against it less. But this idea of new glass and, glass, concrete, all these sort of things are actually, they're not the greatest. The amount of metal and aluminium. And, we work with all those products, but the unnecessary waste frustrates me when it doesn't need to change.
And that's the same thing that's happening in the office furniture industry, where roughly every 7 years, everything in the fit out gets in the bin because there's no system in place. And Australia's biggest recyclist, who was doing the biggest job, unfortunately went into administration about 10 days ago. And so, we thought we were seeing a start, but 95% of office furniture every 7 years goes in the bin, and that's, it's a phenomenal amount of waste.
I think it comes back to what Claire was saying, that sometimes it's just too difficult. Like, definitely years ago, I worked on a project for Red Cross, and it was too hard to sell it. It's easy to chuck it in a bin. It's too hard to find a home for all this vintage furniture that is of quality, but someone doesn't need. And part of that, I think, is the barrier. Sometimes it's just doing the good thing takes a bit more effort.
Let's switch gears a little bit over to the Commons, where you were asked to give them a brand language and create a process for them to be able to move through these spaces as they grow. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So we work with the Commons, who are Workspace and moving into Health Club brand across a number of locations, and part of that work was setting a fundamental language of what their spaces were about. And this, primarily comes from a creative perspective in terms of what they're doing is, in order to not create a series of, I think we've done 7 now, and there's about 12 in the portfolio, spaces that feel the same everywhere, is, well, actually, let's work with the space. So one of the core principles of their design language is, what is the building telling us? What can we work with? You know, where can we expose concrete? Where can we work with the quirks of somewhere to actually give it character? I mean, the frustrating example from a sustainability perspective recently is we've just finished Collins Place in Melbourne in the Iron Pie building, which is one of my absolute favourites. And the granite core is still there, and it's still beautiful from 1979. And the brief for the base build architects for the lobby was to cover it up, and because it's old now, it's done, and so they've covered it in anodized aluminium, which is one of the worst materials to use sustainably. But because it was our tenancy above it, we've exposed it all, and it looks so great. And it's actually just like, this granite's beautiful, and it's still there. So actually let the building do what it's doing and give that as part of the language, so that we're not covering every surface. And I think part of that's about the sort of language of editing. Actually, not covering everything with a material which may date or wear, and actually let the building have more character, patina, and personality through what you're working with. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you haven't got much to work with, but when you have, you should try and use it.
Well, that's probably the perfect segue to you, Eve. So working as part of one of the biggest building suppliers in the country, you've been a sustainably led, say that 3 times, a sustainably led brand for quite a long time. Do you want to first of all explain the breadth of Brickworks and the product ranges, because it's not only bricks, and then step into the sustainability thinking and how that was seeded, some time back, almost 20 years ago now?
Yeah, sure, thank you. I think at Brickworks we talk a lot about enduring value, and I think all of the panel tonight have touched on that concept as well. So we're best known as a brick company, but we make concrete masonry products. We cure concrete masonry products, which is how we made our paver in collaboration with the Mud team. Australian granite. I guess our core purpose is about those resilient finishes, natural products that contribute to healthier indoor air environments. Health and wellness is something that we're having a lot of conversations about now, so that's our key position in the market. I suppose you were mentioning that complex nature of sustainability earlier, and it's true for our company that our understanding and thinking about sustainability has changed a lot over time. But over 10 years ago now, we made, I guess, a leadership position in launching the first carbon neutral. It was a climate active, carbon neutral certified brick made in Tasmania, made with biofuels, so quite dramatically decreasing the embodied carbon of those products. And celebrated our 10-year anniversary back in 2023. So look, we also understand now there's concerns about offsets. For us, it's sort of an interim measure while you are making bigger plays around decarbonisation. And I think that work for us now is really clear and present in our mind. And the first step there is transparency. So just this year, we've just launched our EPDs, covering over 300 locally made products. A big job for our team, and we're proud of that, and we've got a lot more to build on from there. Now that we've got the benchmark, we know what's the next step to take.
And how much of this is driven by collaboration with the industry, with like the specifiers specifically, and how much of it is driven internally? Like, do you have the specifiers coming to you with an idea and then that creates something and that becomes a product range? Or do you have a product team internally that drives that thinking?
Look, I think it's huge. I can't understate the role that our collaborators, our key industry advisors have. We work very closely with the architectural community to make sure we're keeping pace with expectations. You can hear from the panel tonight what those expectations are. So it definitely does really drive us and motivate us. At the same time, we are a publicly listed company, so there's investor and other stakeholder guidance as well. But certainly it's been our conversations with industry that are really the key push.
And with before we get on to the collaboration with Mud, you've done some projects with Claire. Does one or do both of you want to talk through the various different projects that you've done together? Because you've used byproduct and used dead stock in completely different ways for completely, different types of projects.
Yep.
I love it when you call, so I'll let you talk about your projects.
Good, nice to hear you say that, because it feels like it's very often. Brickworks has always been very generous to us with helping us do a range of things. The dead stock, that's a good opportunity. We did we were the architects on a brewery on the Sunshine Coast, and that was a big hospitality project, kind of tight budgets, timeframes, but we worked with Brickworks to find dead stock masonry, so concrete block that was in Gympie, if any of you know Queensland, sitting in the back of a yard. I think it had been there for 10 years, and there was the wrong aggregate that had been put in, so it's a perfectly fine structural block. So we were able to substitute that for other places where concrete block work was kind of necessary. And then we just did another fun one together, which was pretty rewarding. A mural for the client was Woolworths, but it was an artwork that we sort of drawn a mural designed by Jodie Rala, who is a local Turrbal and I should know the other country woman. Sorry, Jodie. And she designed a beautiful artwork that we then reinterpreted through brick. And that was a story about local soil. And so again, Eve sort of told us and helped us understand from your range what was the most kind of relevant soil to that particular place. And then we sort of redrew Jodie's artwork using your brick, but we, to get more texture into that wall, we sliced the brick. So I think we sliced something like there was 2,300 bricks in this whole artwork mural that wrapped around this facade of different colours and textures, and that's really a celebration of place. And was a great way to kind of connect architectural thinking to First Nations principles, which are a lot about material and story and lineage and heritage.
And that goes back to something that we spoke about earlier, Mark, when you were saying like part of your work with the Commons is to encourage clients to embrace the texture and the imperfections with what's there. Like, how does that become part of the fabric and personality of or character of the space?
It's kind of in a way of not, again, partly comes back to the fashion thing, I suppose, of not actually expecting everything to be new and actually, looking at the way materials age and patina. With like the Commons, it's even quite simple things of now it developed quite a good little black book of where all that office furniture goes, and actually loving really good furniture. We've spoken a bit about furniture in the great pieces that are made well will last a long, long time, and actually they're still great. And so actually chairs don't have to be new in a fit out, because sometimes they're great and they love. And I think it's the same thing with the way you need clients obviously who kind of also want to look at things that way. Talk about we were talking with Richard from Cult earlier. We've designed showrooms for Cult over the years, and again it's about someone going, actually let's let the space be what it is and let's just design well. And obviously the same with Mud, of people understanding and wanting to go on that journey of it not having to be new and therefore maybe disposable eventually.
That's interesting. I was speaking to Josh from Cultivated yesterday. We're giving a talk in Melbourne next week, and he was saying that they've supplied chairs that are third life, not second life, that are third life for your fit outs.
Yeah, which
how does the client embrace, it's not a second life, it's a third life.
I'm not sure if they know, actually. They're just really trusting.
But that's a really great story, though.
But it's also it probably comes a bit about what you were talking with, the sort of, can't remember what you said about the product in Gympie, but it also sometimes making that, it's a win-win, because that is great product that maybe the budget can't always afford, because it is at a more affordable level. It means you can actually reuse as opposed to everything being new. And these are quality products that enable them to be reused in that way, but actually, even just from a slightly selfish design perspective, it means you can have great pieces that you might not be able to afford actually, because you're still getting great design, but it's just that it's on its second or third life and actually been loved and reimagined.
One of the challenges we had when we did the Brooklyn store was that every American builder just wanted to rip it out and stick an aluminium window in it. And I don't know if anybody's seen our Brooklyn store, but it's the most beautiful space, and it has the most beautiful windows, and the glass is ridiculous and it probably should be replaced, but the people from the Brooklyn Heritage Association came and thanked us for not ripping it apart and not making it brand new, even though we probably could have. It would have definitely been cheaper to do it that way. Yeah. And fortunately, you know, we had the team that made it, you know, could see the vision and could keep the falling to pieces ceiling and the, you know, everything that was old and beautiful.
It's the ease, I think. Sometimes I was, you know, on the roof and in a building in Alexandria today that we're refurbishing that, you know, it's got a lot of problems in terms of structure and water coming through the roof, and the timber floor looks like you should throw it all out. And actually, when we've spent a couple of hours there today pulling it apart, going, we can reuse this. You just need to obviously stop the water, sort out the structure, and actually, we can make this work, and it will eventually add more to that space because it's, you know, it's a beautiful building from the 1940s, and I don't really want to put a new timber floor in it either, to be honest. So even just from a design perspective, that's also a win.
Eve, so the same way that Claire said, and then Shelley came knocking. Did Shelley come knocking to you, or how did that collaboration come apart?
Yeah, you met some of our team at an event. I think Brickworks is famous for our event hospitality and getting out there and chatting to people.
We'd had a few glasses of wine, I think.
And that's always an enabler of great ideas. I think the conversation initially, it started quite some time ago, and I think this is an interesting point around utilising waste, because it can take a little while to find the right composition or the right factory to be able to make something beautiful out of it. So I think we trialled product in one of our facilities at Gympie, actually. We were going to have a go at making a really cool breeze block, but we couldn't get the beautiful porcelain waste to actually pop through to the face, which we thought was really important. I think to that point about, the waste terrazzo that you're making, I think people are really, they want to celebrate reuse, and I think it starts those important conversations that we all need to be having. So yeah, we kept working, and we eventually found the very local Oakdale facility that was able to come up with the beautiful paver that we've made now.
And talk us, either one of you, talk us through the pavers, how are they made, and what would people expect if they haven't seen them?
So the great thing for us is we just get all the broken pieces and throw them in a bucket. Our team, people at the back, maybe have smashed a few pieces. If you're ever having a bad day at Mud, you can always go and smash these broken pieces. But they don't. We mix all the colours together. With our project, we're really keeping everything quite separate and coming up with colour palettes and changing and creating something new that is old, but it's something new for the customers, and people love the trivets. But in this process, we can just take everything that, and it makes me think of the pieces that get glazed but break. We really should fire them because they now have a space to go. It's the one part that still goes into landfill for us, but maybe it doesn't need to. If we can find a way of firing them, maybe we'll talk about that after. But firing them and then keeping those broken pieces to add to that.
We have to do a little bit more work with the broken pieces when they come to us, and that's because if in the process where we're forming and curing these pavers, if the waste aggregate is too big, it tends to pop out. But we found through our team, they found a local processor. So again, it's just like bringing another person into the journey and having them get interested and inspired by what's doing and sparking those thought processes and conversations. Everyone loves the paver. We've got them in our Sydney studio, so you must come and have a look. And I think
just one out the front.
One out the front as well. I think it's a really refined finish. It's going to be very durable. It'll last forever.
And polished porcelain is really pretty.
Yeah,
it just sort of sits in both projects. They really are. It's wonderful because we had this problem before. We don't have a problem now. But the problem we have is we don't have enough product.
We are very limited edition with these pavers, so please get in quick. But yeah, we look forward to further collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bearing in mind everyone's patience and end of the evening and time, is there anyone with any burning questions from the audience on anything that's been said tonight? So the question, if I understand it correctly, is to unpack how 5 Mile Radius has come a lot further than 5 miles in 5 short years. Do you want to give us the run through that, please, Claire?
Thank you. I will briefly, I guess. Well, for before the 5 years, the 5-year mark is the foundation of a company as a business structure. The sort of 2 or 3 years before that was sort of an informal cult, was what people used to call it. And it was really a sort of a gang of 7 of us who would run events and build sort of projects for no money. And they're all self-funded or self-started or paid for with $5,000 art grants and sort of subsidised by teaching, and there was no money. But we had a cool spot that we built a shed out of waste, and it was really trying to start a movement. So the idea was more around a movement than a business, actually. It was about trying to, like, I'd just sort of become obsessed with this theory about local materials, and I thought, like, it made my architectural career makes sense. All of a sudden there was a reason to choose one material over another, so I thought everyone should come along on this journey to a certain extent. So that's sort of how we started, and then I guess so yeah, you just have to cop not making a lot of money for a while, basically, and still not. But you at